Hurricanes can be dangerous and deadly. No one really likes or wants them except for, well, maybe children who want to get out of school. However, we will show you a hurricane that saved the nation, and then later, give you a bonus hurricane you won't believe. The story of a short-lived British occupation of a poorly defended Washington, D.C. in 1814 is a semi-well-known event. During the War of 1812, the British wanted to attack something in their former colonies in which they ruled. England wanted some sort of a revenge after the American troops attacked Canada and burned a few government buildings. Many living in Washington were reasonably sure that the British Army would attack the thriving port of Baltimore rather than their new capital city. However, the British General Robert Ross and Rear Admiral George Cockburn wanted to demoralize the country just enough to get her to surrender. Washington was selected possibly because of its symbolic importance. It was easily accessed from the sea, and the American troops that would defend it were weak and inexperienced. President James Madison and his wife Dolly were aware of the threat and made plans to escape the city if and when the British might attack. On Wednesday morning, August 24, 1814, Dolly Madison was surveying the surrounding land, wondering if her husband would return. All she saw was wearied, defeated American troops who had been easily defeated by the British Army walking back into the city. President Madison, his cabinet, and several government officials, including Secretary of State James Monroe, had fled, avoiding narrowly being captured. Later that evening, her husband, the president, sent word to evacuate Washington. She, along with servants and a few friends, began loading portable articles, documents, and other items of importance onto a wagon. The most notable item was a full-length Gilbert Stuart painting of President George Washington. The First Lady pointed to the painting and instructed Paul Jennings, a 15-year-old enslaved African-American, to save the painting if possible. If not possible, destroy it. Under no circumstance would it fall into the hands of the British. Initially, she wanted Jennings to help remove the entire portrait, frame and all, but the British approached rather quickly and time was running out. She ordered Jennings to break the frame apart so the canvas could be removed with a knife. Two friends of the Madison family then took the painting and stored it in a farmhouse outside of Washington for safekeeping. The British had burned several buildings, including the building for the Senate, the House of Representatives, the Library of Congress, the U.S. Treasury Building, and many other public buildings. As the British troops marched down Pennsylvania Avenue towards the presidential mansion, Dolly, her servants, and friends barely escaped before the soldiers entered the building. Basically, she was going out the back door as they were coming in the front. Now get this, the British troops began eating leftovers in the White House. They ransacked the mansion and then set it ablaze. What an awful sight this must have been for the remaining Washingtonians in the city. The next morning, the temperatures were close to 100 degrees. The British were looking for ammunition and other supplies to burn. The night before, 30 British soldiers were killed in a gunpowder supply debacle. So now the soldiers were in a hurry. They also thought the Americans were coming back with a large militia. Storms were brewing. The locals were running for cover. Winds dramatically increased and a frightful tornado developed over the city. This roaring funnel ripped through Washington and headed straight for the British troops. Structures were either torn off their foundations or blown down. Trees were uprooted. Chimneys collapsed. Fences were thrown about. Even mattresses were sucked out of windows. A heavy chain bridge across the Potomac River was buckled, and many British cannons were actually picked up and thrown. Everyone was in a panic. Many British soldiers did not have enough time to take cover and were killed by collapsing buildings or flying debris. Later, a conversation was noted about a British admiral and a Washington lady about the storm. The admiral exclaimed, "Good God, madam, is this kind of storm to which you're accustomed in this infernal country?" The lady answered, "No, sir. This is a special interpositional of Providence to drive our enemies from our city." The admiral replied, "Not so, ma'am. It is rather to aid your enemies in the destruction of your city." Eventually the winds quieted down, but the rain fell down in buckets for 2 more hours. This quenched most of the flames and prevented Washington from continuing to burn. The shaken British Army gathered near Capitol Hill and left Washington that evening. Their journey back to their ships was slowed by downed trees laying across the road. When they reached their ships, 2 had broken free from their moorings and had washed ashore. A British commander later said that more of their soldiers were wounded and killed by this storm than from firearms American troops would muster in their weak and ineffective defense of Washington. Now, for a bonus hurricane that aided a nation. If you watched our episode about the lost colony of Roanoke, you remember John White was stuck in England due to their war with Spain from 1587 to 1590. That same war saw a hurricane that aided a nation. The Spanish Armada set out to take control of the English Channel in July 1588. the fleet of 130 ships sailed towards the English Channel. They were met by a much smaller force, the Royal English Navy. The English felt outmatched and quickly demoralized. They thought there was no hope. England had been fasting and praying. A huge storm arose without any notice whatsoever and pushed the Spanish ships into rocky shoals of Holland. This sank a majority of the Spanish armada, but oddly enough, the smaller English ships were not affected by the storm. The English Navy managed to maneuver their vessels through the rough seas and next to the Spanish ships. The strong seamen were able to set the enemy's ships ablaze. While the English loss of life was minimal, the Spanish, however, lost both massive amounts of life and property. The Spanish was about to return to Spain in tatters. Now the English were left in control of the channel. The weathered, battered down armada made a slow retreat. There was only one way available, a 1,500-mile journey back around the entire British Isles. Oh, it gets better though. A powerful storm, a hurricane, came in from the north of Scotland. On August 22nd, this storm hit the remaining 112 ships of the fleet. The Spanish fleet was now completely broken. 24 of the beaten-up ships to survive the storm washed up on the jagged shores of Ireland. Many of the other ships ended up breaking apart near the battered shores. Hundreds of Spanish drowned in those cold waters. Now get this, some survivors swam and struggled to land. If that's not bad enough, when they reached the land, they were beaten and all their belongings were taken by local Irish residents. Only a couple of the units were able to repair their ships and return to Spain. Wow! Well, some hurricanes actually helped some nations to fight their enemies. That is strange indeed. We will keep these videos coming here on Strange History. Hey, check out our video on the lost colony of Roanoke. 118 people went missing. That's strange also.